How will Vladimir Putin cope with his biggest headache, the aging population of Russia? This is a good question. Once again, Russia's population is indeed aging. The fertility rates in Russia have dropped way below replacement levels. I'm not sure what the numbers are. You can look it up. But we know that the population is declining, the population is aging, and that is indeed a long term problem for Russia. They need to do something about this. And we have to ask ourselves, why do such things happen? Why do certain nations undergo such declines? It typically happens when the cost of living becomes high and the salaries or your income, the median income per individual or per family, drops. So when the cost of living is very high and your income doesn't quite support that, it becomes really hard to have more kids, because how will you support those kids and their education and everything you would want to give to your children? And that's why most parents in such situations, they decide to have fewer kids. Some decide not to have kids at all. Yeah, see what's happening in Japan. See what happened in China. It was like state policy, only one child. In Russia, there's no such thing. But what happened in Russia was, in the last 30 years, was close to a disaster. After the disintegration of the USSR, the Russian economy was deliberately, systematically destroyed by Boris Yeltsin. Boris Yeltsin was most likely doing this at the behest of his masters in the West. He was a darling of the Western media and the Western nations, right? For good reason. He was implementing their policies of destroying the legacy and the economy of that the USSR had built over seven, or I don't know how many decades. Close to 7 decades. Boris Yeltsin systematically destroyed Russia's great industries and everything the Russians had built up, and everything the Russian people had saved and contributed to the economy of the USSR. So, because Russia's economy was almost destroyed, inflation was skyrocketing, the prices of daily, everyday, basic commodities were skyrocketing. The Russian nation went through close to 2 decades of absolute misery, and that obviously will have a consequence of people having less children. Now things may be looking better. Now maybe slowly the birth rate, the fertility rate may rise, but that's gonna take time, and the impact of these two lost decades is gonna be significant, right? So there's the population is aging, the average age is rising, there are fewer births per fertile woman, or whatever the statistic is. So how does Russia deal with this? The Russians will have to deal with this by improving their economy. That's the long term view. You improve your economy, you make the median income rise, and you bring the costs of living down. People will automatically start having more children. If people are happier, if the nation is doing well, you automatically have a higher fertility rate. But obviously, it's not going to be like the impoverished nations where the cost of living is low and the medium income is also low, where you can afford to have 15 kids. Some nations have this, right? So it's not going to be like that. But hopefully it goes above 2.1, which is the replacement rate. But in the short term, what can the Russians do? In Russia, there are certain regions of Russia which have above replacement fertility rates, TFR, total fertility rates. Once again, I just now spoke about the Caucasus region. Yes. So the Caucasus region, whether it is Chechnya, whether it is Dagestan, this region has a significantly high fertility rate, which is significantly, I believe, higher than 2.1 per woman. So these are the Muslim republics of Russia. These republics right now are providing the bulk of the soldiers that are participating in the Ukraine intervention. There have been special detachments that have been raised from Grozny in Chechnya that have gone and served their nation in the Ukraine conflict. And so if you look at 100 soldiers participating from Russia, you will have these regions that are currently being overrepresented, right? So the birth rates are very good, very healthy in Chechnya, in Dagestan, in the Caucasus region, and so that's where we are. So that could be a solution to the Russian aging population problem, the replacement rate and fertility crisis. And some analysts have projected that in the next 30 to 50 years, by 2050 or so, Russia could be about 30% of the Russian population could reside in the Caucasus region. And obviously that will have certain cultural effects and all that, religious effects, but that's how it is. So there are short-term solutions, there are long-term solutions. What Mr. Putin wants to do, um, well, Mr. Putin is already in his late 60s, early 70s, so he may have, eventually he will have to hand over power to a successor, hopefully somebody he elects or selects, or the Russian people select, whatever it is, whatever the mechanism is. And most likely it's going to be that next person, the successor's headache in the long run. But right now, Mr. Putin will have to do something about it, which could involve taking steps to ameliorate the economic situation in Russia.